and then suddenly he hits something, and it's the treasures from the Kaaba that the Jurhums threw into the well, because they had to flee. They threw all these treasures into the well. There's all these golden idols and things. So he's pulling these out. And the Quraysh is seeing now they're not worried about digging in the sacred spot anymore. They're interested in the booty, right? And then Zamzam reemerges. Now this is an extraordinary event. It's a very important event. And they begin to argue about what should happen. Now al-Muṭṭalib, obviously his argument is, look, I had the dream. You know, this is my stuff. And I'm also a Hashimi. I'm supposed to give water to the Hujjaj. So I'm just fulfilling my duty here. Now, they obviously have an argument, and they begin to, so what they do is they go to the Kaaba, and there's these divining arrows, right? Divination, right? Everybody has an idea, I think, of what that means, divination. Divination is still used to this day. Probably one of the more dominant ways of divination is the I Ching, right, which is a Chinese thing. A lot of New Age type people use the I Ching. Astrology is a form of divination. If there are many people like Ronald Reagan who, when he wanted to do something important, he would contact an astrologer and ask them, is this a good time? Are the stars in the right thing? And they would say, yeah, it's a good time, right, to do whatever you want to do. And that's what he would do. So this is an ancient thing that even the Pharaoh, his people, he would ask them. Nimrod asked his divine. It's in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. This is an ancient thing, and that's why the fact that they're still doing it, you know, people can laugh about it, but the truth is, this is part of human behavior. Human beings tend to be very superstitious, and so divination is a way of working out what does the divine want? What does that sacred world want me to do in this situation? So they had arrows that they would cast, and depending on which way they would face. Another thing the Arabs used to do, and this is why they call it tiyara, which is a bad omen, is they used to go to birds. And what they would do, they'd find some birds sitting, and they would want to do something, and they would run to the birds and scare the birds, and the birds would fly. If they flew to the left, because birds fly in a flock, they would take a bad omen. It's called a sha'am, tasha'um. And if they flew to the right, they would take a good omen, which is called a yameen. And so this is how the Arabs would do things. Now, they do this, and the lots are casted, and basically the Qurayshis accept this, right? They accept it that al-Muṭṭalib, the treasure, right? Some of it goes to the Kaaba, some to al-Muṭṭalib, but none to the Quraysh in general. And the clan of Hashim should be in charge of the Zamzam, because it was their function to water the pilgrims anyway. So they accept that. Now, I want to bring out something, because the next section is about the vow to sacrifice a son. One of the things that al-Muṭṭalib really troubled him on that day was when things were getting tense. He only had one son, whereas the other tribal members had a lot of sons. And the Arabs, in fact, in Surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in Mudaththir, وَأَمْدَدْنَاهُمْ بِمَالٍ وَبَنِينَ. In one verse in there it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him مَمْدُودًا مَالًا مَمْدُونًا وَبَنِينَ شُهُودًا. He gave him wealth, mamdud, a lot of wealth, and this mughira, right? He gave him wealth and baneen, shuhud, like children that are going to be there to protect him. And so this was important to the Arabs. And so he makes an oath, and he says that if Allah will grant him, and this is all of the Prophet's ancestors they didn't worship idols, including Muṭṭalib. They did not call on idols. They called on Allah. And Muṭṭalib does this in the al-Fīl, which is coming up. Now, what happens is that he makes a vow, and he says, oh Allah, if you give me 10 sons, and he's already in the prime of his life. If you give me 10 sons, I'll sacrifice one for you. Now this goes back to the Abrahamic tradition here. You know, that Ibrahim was ready to sacrifice a son. This was an exaggeration. ʿAbd al-Muṭṭalib really, I don't think, thought that he would have 10 sons. But it was kind of like saying, you know, just give me some sons and if you give me 10, I'll even kill one for you. You know, it was like saying, I really want this badly, and I'm ready to do something really drastic for it. Now, really important thing here for you to understand. This is from Herodotus, who is he's about 450 BC, before Christ, right? Before the Christian era. And he's talking about an event that happens where, that there was the wine jars in Egypt used to be taken and distributed in different places. And there was a burgomaster who's responsible for that. In each town, he had to collect the wine jars within his district, carry them to Memphis, where they were all filled with water by the Memphians, who would then convey them to this desert tract of Syria. And so it comes to pass that all the jars which enter Egypt year by year and are there put up to sale find their way into Syria, whither all the old jars have gone before them. This way of keeping the passage into Egypt fit for use by storing water there was begun by the Persians, so as they became masters of that country. As, however, at the time of which we speak, the tract had not yet been so supplied. Cambyses took the advice of his Halicarnassian guest and sent messengers to the Arabian to beg a safe conduct through the region. In other words, the king of the Arabs at that time, the leader. The Arabian granted his prayer, and each pledged a faith, right? Made a faith pledge to the other. In other words, this Arab told this Greek, I promise that we'll support you as long as you're in my land. Now listen to what Herodotus says, because this is really important. The Arabs keep such pledges more religiously than almost any other people. You see, that's a testimony by a Greek in 450 BC. In other words, recognizing that Arabs did not break their religious oaths. They kept their oaths more religious. And this is really important to understand the whole reason why Allah gave these people the banner of Islam. You see, the Arabs were given it. And the reason they were given it was because they were people of wafa. They didn't break their oaths. If they made an oath, they kept it, even the Jahili Arab. I mean, look at what happens when the Prophet ﷺ, when he's signing, putting the stamp on the tree, it says, Muhammad Rasulullah. They said, if we thought that you were Rasulullah, we wouldn't be fighting you or preventing you from getting to the house. In other words, we're doing this out of conviction. We don't believe you. If we believed you, we certainly wouldn't be fighting you. The point is, they weren't people they were people that really did have deep conviction, more so than other peoples. And this is really important. So ʿabd al-Muṭṭalib is a Sayyid of the Arab. His oath is worth even more than your average Arab, who by the witnessing of her eyes says these people keep their religious oaths more than any other people. So he's a Sayyid of the Arab, and he made an oath to God that if he gave him 10 sons, he's going to kill one. Now what happens is, he gets 10 sons. He gets 10 sons. And they're all extraordinary people, right? Al-Harith was the first, Zubair, Abu Talib, Abu Lahab, Abdullah, al-Abbas, Hamza. He has 6 daughters. And then here it says he has 6 other sons, but there's a few more, but there's 10 altogether. Now, what happens is, as his sons are growing up, and finally, right, he gets his son here born, and Abdullah is born. And again, Abdullah is an extraordinary, I mean, obviously he's the father of the Prophet ﷺ, extraordinarily handsome, very fine young man, and he has to sacrifice one of his sons. So what happens is he decides to go to a diviner, right? Well, first he's just going to go sacrifice his son. So he goes out there, he takes a knife out, right? And he casts lots, and it shows Abdullah. The arrow comes out to Abdullah, which again is important because this is a divine intervention here. His father took him by the hand, and with the knife in his other hand, he led him to the door, intending to make straight for the place of sacrifice, as if afraid to give himself time to think. Now, the women, never underestimate the women of the household. And this is Fatima, who's the mother of Abdullah, right? His other wives were from outlying tribes of relatively little influence in Mecca. But Fatima was a woman of Quraysh, but she was a Makhzumiyya. This is, the Makhzumiyya is Walid ibn al-Mughira's people. These are very powerful people in Quraysh. Now, and also from her mother's side, she's descended from ʿAbd, one of the sons of. All of her family were at hand, within easy reach, ready to help her if need be. 3 of the 10 sons were hers: Zubair, al-Muṭṭalib, and Abdullah. So, she's also the mother of al-Muṭṭalib's 5 daughters. So she's a very important wife. Now, what happens is that the Makhzum might say, "What are you going to do there?" Because he's got the knife ready. "What are you going to do there?" He has to listen to them. They're powerful people. He made an oath. Now they convince him to offer a sacrifice instead and ransom him, and they say, "The sons of Makhzum will take care of whatever that ransom is. We'll do this." Now, what happens is they're all begging him now. You can see this amazing scene here. And al-Muṭṭalib, right, he's got scruples. He said, "I made an oath to Allah." And he's not fully convinced that he can get out of it so easily. And so he says, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to go to a woman in Yathrib," again another significant event, "who could tell me whether an expiation was possible in this case and how he should do it." So she goes to this woman in Yathrib, who's known for her divination, and she says, "What is the blood with amongst you?" She asks him. 10 camels. So she says, "Return to your country, put your man and 10 camels by his side, cast lots between them. If the arrow falls against your man, and more camels, and cast lots, and if need be, add more camels until your Lord accepts the thing." All right, so she's telling him how to get around this. And he accepts this. So he goes out again, begins to cast the lots. Now they keep following to the camels. Yet, in other words, against the camels. They keep following to Abdullah, saying that he has to kill Abdullah until he gets to 100. Right? And then they go towards the camels. Now, at that point, he's still not convinced. So he says, "I have to see," and this is again trust, a deep trust. He has to see another time, and he did it, and it fell against the camels for 3 times. And at last he was certain that Allah had accepted the fida. And so all the camels were sacrificed. And this was a big celebration. Now, what happens here is al-Muṭṭalib, right? If you look at the Arabs at this time, most of the Arabs were idol worshippers, with the exception of a small group of people who were known as ḥunafāÐ. And the word hanif in Arabic means to incline towards what's straight, right? It means to incline towards what's straight. In Greek, you would probably say orthodox, because orthodox means straight path, or straight practice, or straight belief. So they were a group of people who did not believe in the idols. They did not believe in them. Most of them did not condemn the idol. They just stayed out of it. They prayed to Allah. Didn't have anything to do with the idols. Now, there were different idols there. And obviously, again, interesting here to note. This is 450, where Herodotus makes mention of the idols also of the Arabs. I don't think I photocopied that section. But he mentioned that the Arabs mainly worship an idol, which he said they called al-Lat, and he considered it to be Bacchus, the Greek god of wine and pleasure. So there was obviously, the Quran mentions Lat, Manat, Uzza, right? These were, they called them the Banat Allah, the daughters of Allah, and they were very prominent idols in their whole pantheon. Lat was also the lady of Ta'if, and she had a big temple in Ta'if, right? And Bani Thaqif are the people in Ta'if, who are an important tribe, and also in the history later, they come up again. So particularly al-Thaqafi, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, kind of gives them a type of notoriety that they probably didn't need. Now, when in the Quran it mentions, had this Quran, had this Quran been revealed to one of the two great men in the two cities, Qaryatain. The Qaryatain were Mecca and Ta'if, and obviously because of Lat's position amongst the Arabs, the temple in Ta'if is an important temple, second to the Kaʿba, right? So it does have a relative importance within the Arabs. Now, al-Muṭṭalib knew four of the ḥunafāʼ, and one of the more respected of them was Waraqa bin Nawfal. And Waraqa is from the clan of Asad. Same Khadija is the daughter of Nawfal, the daughter of the son of Asad. And Waraqa is the cousin of Khadija, radiallahu anha. Now, Waraqa could actually read, he could read text. He knew the scripture. And it's important, one of the things that he says to the Prophet is, he says, this is the Greek word, which is nomos, which means in Arabic, sharia, right? And nomos was the word that the Hellenized Jews used for the Torah. You see? So he said, because there's the Septuagint version, which is translated in Alexandria from into Greek, right? So the Torah was in Greek, and there were actually many Jews who only knew how to read the Torah in Greek, and they called it the nomos. And so this is what Waraqa says, an clear indication that he was educated. You see, that he did know what terms they used and things like that. So he said this is the namus that came to Musa alayhi salam, and he could also read the New Testament, right? So he was, and it said that he had become a Christian, right? Now, the Christians of that time, there were different Christians. There's one theory that the Christians, because the Christians of that area, and most of the Christians were in Yemen, there were no Christians in the Arabian Peninsula, here in the Hijaz or the Najd. There were some Christians here near Bahrain and these places. There were Christians in Yemen, and there were Christians from the Ghassasina and the Lakhmid. So there were Christians amongst the Arabs, but in this area, there were no Christians. All of this area. I shouldn't put that's kind of like a cross. No Christians, right? So what happens is that many of the Christians believed that there was going to be a prophet coming at this time. The Jews also believed. Now, the Jews actually had Bani Qurayza, Bani Quniqa'a, Bani Nadir. They were in Yathrib, and they believed that there was the final prophet would show up. They had it in their book that the final prophet would show up in this area. People don't realize the extent of prophetic literature, not just in the Islamic tradition. In all these different traditions, there's massive amounts of prophetic literature. The only people that are interested in it are the Jews. And all the research. Unfortunately, Muslims, very few Muslims have they don't even have an interest in their own literature. Not to mention the literature of other people. But there's a great deal literature in the Vedic tradition. The Hindus have the tradition of the end of time. The Buddhists have a tradition of the end of time. The Jews have a very strong tradition of the end of time. The Christians had a very strong tradition of the end of time. And obviously the Muslims have a strong tradition. The point being is that these people knew that a prophet was coming to that area. And the Jews were very interested in it. They thought that it was going, obviously, to be from them. And that's why they were there. They also knew that his name would be Muhammad. They did have a knowledge of the name. The name was mentioned. And there were actually 4 people on the Arabian Peninsula prior to the Prophet ﷺ that had been named Muhammad, all hoping that their son would be that. Right. So there was a knowledge that this prophet was coming. Now, what happens is one of the things that there's he mentions in here that he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall speak, here he shall speak, which is from the Gospel of John 16:13, which is about the Paraclete. Obviously, most Muslims believe that that's speaking about the Prophet ﷺ. So, al-Muṭṭalib basically had, once the sacrifice of the camel has been accepted, he wanted his son to marry, and it fell on Āmina, the daughter of Wahab, who's a grandson of Zuhra, the brother of Qusay, right? Now, Wahab was a chief, very important person so she's a noble woman, has a very strong position. And so he decides also to marry at the same time, al-Muṭṭalib. You can see he's obviously very happy about what happened. This was a big event for him. And this Qutayla, who's a sister of Waraqah. Qutayla is very interesting because Qutayla, on the actual way to the wedding, al-Muṭṭalib is walking with his son, Abdullah, and obviously he's going to be dressed in his finest and look very spectacular. Qutayla sees him, and she says, where are you going? And so al-Muṭṭalib says, talk to her, and he turns, and, he's kind of struck by the question because everybody knows he's going to get married to Āmina. And she says, marry me right now. And she said, and I'll give you all the wealth and these things. She was a wealthy woman. And now obviously because she's the sister of Waraqah, she's going to be talking with her brother. Her brother's going to be telling her about this prophet who's coming. And so, according to Ibn Ishaq, the next day, after he has his wedding night with Āmina, she sees him. She doesn't say anything about getting married anymore. And he says, what's the matter? You were ready to marry me yesterday. What happened today? And she just said, the light that I saw with you yesterday, it's gone. Right? So she saw that prophetic light in his face. And it was, when it left his loins, then it was now, and so she said, I don't have any need of you anymore. So that was 569. Now this is going to be very important because the next year, an event happens that's really important. There's a character in Ethiopia whose name is Abraha. And Abraha, probably Abraham from that, is a Christian. And the Ethiopians had very strong ties with the Yemenis. To this day, they still do. There are many Yemenis whose name is al-Habashi, very common family in Yemen. So the Ahbash and the Yemenis had a lot of intermixing, which is why you'll often find very dark-skinned Yemenis. Some of the Yemenis, they look African more than they look Arab. And so there was very strong ties between the Yemen and between Habash. And what happens is Abraha builds a church in Sana'a. And it's a huge church, and he writes a letter to the Najashi in Ethiopia, and he tells him, this church it will become the pilgrimage of the Arab, and I'm going to get them, remove them from the pilgrimage in Mecca, right? Stop that them going to Mecca. And he sends this letter to him. And it was a beautiful church, incredibly ornamented, all these things. Well, the Arabs get wind of this. They hear about this, right? And it really upset all these tribes in the Najd and the Hijaz. Now, there was a man from Kinana, and Kinana is one of the fathers of Quraysh, right? Kinana goes back to Adnan. It's an Adnani tribe, and they're in the Najd. And this is a Bedouin character. He's a tough guy. When he hears this, he says, what? Who does he think he is? And he makes an oath that he's going to go defile the church, right, as a way of showing. So he goes there and he defecates in the church, right? Just to let him know that's what the Arabs think about his church in relation to the Kaaba. Now, this is obviously not a wise thing to do to any religious group, and certainly against the spirit of Islam. But anyway, he did that. And what happens is Abraha, when he finds out this, he said, what's this? And they say, oh, some Arab came and said this is what he thought of your church. And so he makes an oath. And they took their oaths very seriously, that he's going to raise the Kaaba to the ground. Well, some of the Yemenis get wind of this, and they actually go out to fight him. Because the Yemenis, they were Arab. They said, no, you can't do this. He defeats them, takes their chief prisoner. I think Nufail was his name. And then he goes, they continue on. Another group of Arabs attempt to stop him. They can't do it. The Quraysh gets wind of this army moving towards Mecca. And the Quraysh, they're merchants. They were tough people and they could fight, but they didn't have an army. This is a king with an army. This is a government. It's not. And so they meet. They had a place that Qusay built called Dar al-Nidwa. Right? It's a place that Qusay built, and it's where they used to meet. They had their meetings in this house. And basically, al-Muṭṭalib says, there's nothing we can do. If we go out to try to fight them, we're going to all be killed. And so he says, we have to call on Allah. And he actually goes to the Kaaba and begs Allah to protect his house and says, we can't do it. It's your house. You have to defend it. We're not able to defend it. And then he tells the Arabs to go, the Qurayshis, to go into the mountains around Mecca and just leave the sanctuary completely empty. Now, meanwhile, al-Muṭṭalib, who had a lot of camels, he gets his camels, 200 of his camels are taken by Abraha. And what happens is that he goes to meet, Abraha asked for the Sayyid of the Quraysh. And he actually goes and he meets Abraha, and he's let in. There's different riwayah about it, but he basically is let in. Now, he was a stunning looking man, and he was also the Sayyid of the Arab. When Abraha saw him, he was actually overwhelmed by him. And he did something very unusual, which was he got off of his kursi, like a type throne that he took with him on his journey, and actually sat on the same level as al-Muṭṭalib, which was very unusual. And the Habashis obviously were kind of struck by this. And so he says, he has a translator, and he says, what do you want? And